Everyone loves the image of the Wild West, gunfights at high noon, poker tables, and whiskey flowing under dim saloon lights. But the truth is far less glamorous and far more brutal. Hunger ruled the frontier. Real, relentless hunger that pushed men beyond comfort, beyond taste, and sometimes beyond reason. When outlaws like Jesse James rode into town after weeks on the trail, they weren't asking for luxury. They were desperate for anything edible. Lawmen chasing them ate from the same pots, often standing just feet apart without even realizing it. The saloon wasn't just a place for drinking, it was survival. Behind every bar counter sat food that told the real story of the West, cheap, rough, and sometimes shocking. These weren't meals crafted for enjoyment. They were built for endurance, for men who needed fuel more than flavor. At the bottom of the list were the meals that defined survival itself. Hardtack soaked in whiskey gravy was one of them. A dish born from desperation. Hardtack, those rock-solid crackers left over from the Civil War, could last for years without spoiling. On their own, they were nearly inedible. But saloon cooks found a way. They crushed them into bacon fat, poured in cheap whiskey, and stirred until it formed a thick paste. It wasn't pretty, but it filled the stomach and dulled the senses. Then there were pickled eggs, floating in cloudy jars at the edge of every bar. They weren't there for taste. They were there to make men thirsty. Free food meant more drinks sold, and in the West, business always came first. Cowboys didn't complain. If it was free, it was worth eating. Some dishes crossed the line from strange to unsettling. Son of a gun stew was exactly what it sounded like, a mix of every usable part of a calf. Organs, marrow, and even stomach contents were boiled together into a thick, rich stew. It was gritty, heavy, and surprisingly prized by those who knew it. Then came prairie dog, hunted out of necessity rather than choice. Roasted over open flames, it tasted close enough to chicken to pass without complaint. Even figures like Doc Holliday reportedly ate it when options ran thin. The rule was simple. Eat what you can catch. On the frontier, survival didn't care about preferences. If it moved, it could be food. And if it didn't move, someone would find a way to cook it anyway. But not everything was rough survival. Some foods were small luxuries that meant everything to men who had nothing. Canned peaches were one of the most prized items in any saloon. Thanks to the expanding railroad, they traveled hundreds of miles to reach dusty frontier towns. Sweet, soft, and dripping in syrup, they were a complete contrast to the harsh diet of beans and dried meat. Cowboys would pay a full day's wage just for a single can. And they didn't waste a drop. They ate the fruit with their hands and drank the syrup straight from the tin. It wasn't just food. It was a reminder of something softer, something human. In a place defined by hardship, even a small taste of sweetness could feel like a miracle. Then there were the dishes that quietly connected cultures across the frontier. In places like Texas and New Mexico, tamales became a staple. Sold by street vendors and eaten inside saloons, they were cheap, filling, and full of flavor. Outlaws like Billy the Kid grew up eating them, and the same vendors likely served the lawmen hunting him. Food didn't care about sides. It crossed boundaries, race, class, and even morality. Everyone ate the same meals. That was the unspoken truth of the West. No matter who you were, hunger made everyone equal. A sheriff and a criminal could share the same plate without a word, united by the one thing they both understood: survival. As the list climbs, the meals become more recognizable, but no less important. Pinto beans were everywhere, cheap, filling, and easy to cook in large quantities. Combined with salt pork and cornbread, they formed the backbone of the frontier diet. This wasn't fancy food, but it was reliable. It kept men going through long days and longer nights. Bread pudding turned stale leftovers into something warm and comforting, soaked in whiskey and baked into sweetness. These dishes showed a different kind of ingenuity. Frontier cooks wasted nothing. Every scrap had a purpose. Every ingredient was stretched as far as it could go, because on the frontier, waste wasn't just careless, it was dangerous. Meat, when available, brought moments of real satisfaction. Venison, hunted fresh, offered a break from salted rations. Cooked quickly and served hot, it reminded men what real food tasted like. Even more surprising were oysters, shipped inland by rail from distant coasts. In towns like Dodge City, men who hadn't seen the ocean in years suddenly found themselves eating fresh seafood. It was expensive, rare, and wildly popular. Meanwhile, rattlesnake became both necessity and novelty. To some, it was just another meal. To others, it was a story worth paying for. The Wild West was full of contradictions like that, harsh and refined at the same time. Then came the meals that truly define the frontier experience. Steak, when done right, was the ultimate reward after months on the trail. Cooked over hot mesquite fires, it carried a flavor that became legendary. Salt pork and gravy, on the other hand, was the everyday equalizer. Cheap, filling, and endlessly adaptable, it showed up everywhere, from saloon counters to outlaw camps. Even figures like Wyatt Earp relied on simple meals like these during their hardest days. These foods weren't just nourishment, they were part of the rhythm of life. They shaped routines, habits, and even decisions. Because when food is scarce, it becomes more than survival. It becomes priority. At the very top were the meals people remembered for the rest of their lives. Buffalo hump roast was one of them. Slow cooked for hours until it became unbelievably tender. The smell alone could draw a crowd from blocks away. And then there was the simple combination that appeared everywhere: beans, salt pork, cornbread, and coffee. It wasn't flashy, but it was dependable. It showed up in records, letters, and memories more than any other meal. Men wrote home about it. They remembered where they ate it. In a world that changed constantly, that consistency mattered. It gave people something to hold on to. And finally, at number one, the meal that defined the entire West: chuck wagon chili with sourdough biscuits. No tomatoes, no beans, just dried meat and spices cooked into something bold and unforgettable. It was the taste of the trail, the flavor of survival. Every cowboy carried it with him, even after he left the open plains behind. When he walked into a saloon, he measured every meal against it, and nothing quite matched. Because this wasn't just food, it was memory. It was hardship, endurance, and identity all in one bowl. The Wild West wasn't built on myths. It was built on moments like these: shared meals, empty plates, and the constant fight to keep going.